Hey everybody, welcome to the Private Club Radio Show, where we give you the scoop on all things private golf and country clubs, from mastering leadership and management, food and beverage excellence, member engagement secrets, board governance, and everything in between, all while keeping it fun and light. Whether you're a club veteran just getting your feet wet or somewhere in the middle, you are in the right place. I'm your host, Denny Corby. Welcome to the show. In this episode, I caught up with Joe Trauger, CEO of the National Club Association, to dig into the latest updates on private clubs, and we talked the big takeaways from their brand new economic impact study done with club benchmarking, CMAA, Club Management Association of America, and the NCA, National Club Association. I mean, we're talking billions in revenue, thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs, and how clubs support, interact, and engage with their local communities. We also talk about what those numbers and what all of that means for advocacy. We talk about upcoming trends and the challenges clubs are facing and might be facing coming up for 2025. As always, we talk about all things club governance and NCA. Real quick, before we get to the episode, I will be releasing my club entertainment guide very, very soon. All things club entertainment, putting on amazing, fun member events, tips, tricks, no pun intended, insights from other club professionals. If you would like early access, I am putting the final touches on. And if you would like early access, an early copy of it, email me, hello@privateclubradio.com, subject line, entertainment guide, and I will make sure you are one of the first people to get it. Big thanks to some of our show partners, Kennis Member Vetting, Golf Life Navigators, and Concert Golf Partners, as well as myself, Denny Corby, the Denny Corby Experience. There's excitement, there's mystery, also there's magic. But Private Club Radio listeners, let's welcome back to the show our friend, Joe Trauger.
Since we last spoke, and I think we might have talked about it briefly, but I don't think we had the results yet. But so we released the economic impact study of private clubs in conjunction. It was a study that was done in conjunction with Club Management Association of America, CMAA, and Club Benchmarking, the National Club Association. And I've talked about this at a couple of speeches that I've given to different groups, and the thing that is really exciting about it from my perspective, and looking at it from the perspective of the organizations that put it together, is this is really going to help us drive additional research and additional data collection that will have a lasting impact on the industry going forward. So, and I don't think it's hyperbole to say that this is the most comprehensive economic study that's been done on private clubs. We have a lot of data. We have a lot of studies on the economic impact of golf, but that doesn't capture all of private clubdom, right? I mean, you have city clubs, yacht, yep, athletic, all different types of clubs. So this is the first study where we really tried to, at least that I'm aware of, that really tried to fix that market and see, how many private clubs are there across the country and what types of clubs are they? So what we found was there's about I think 5,687 private clubs in the United States. For our studies purposes, we focused on those clubs that have more than $1 million in revenue, because the logic was that if you have more than $1 million in revenue, the chances that you have full-time staff and professional staff, that kind of thing, is much higher. Whereas $1 million and below, it's a lot of times it's the members that are doing the operations and just sort of collectively doing those together. So if you narrow that list of clubs to those over $1 million in revenue, there's 3,887 private clubs in the United States, which it's just knowing that number from an advocacy standpoint, from an insight standpoint, from a governance standpoint, is really important and helps us as an organization better serve our members and us, including CMAA and Club Benchmarking and their clients. So 3,887 clubs with more than $1 million in revenue. What does that mean for the economy? That means $32.6 billion in revenue that those clubs generate each year. And that's just the direct impact. So,
and what does that mean? And when you say like how far does that go? Like what do you mean like 32.6 billion?
32 6 point 32.6 billion in revenue annually means that's the revenue that goes into the building of those clubs, into those clubs. That's the revenue that they generate each year
Yeah.
through dues, initiation fees, service fees, and
All that jazz.
all,
Gotcha.
all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's just the direct impact. But if you take it further and then look at the indirect impact, you're talking about multiples beyond that. Sorry, I'm going to have to refer. I have some of the sort of headline numbers um, in memory, but
No, you're
so
good.
so $32.6 billion in direct revenue and economic impact. You add the indirect impact, so that's the services and goods that clubs buy in their local communities. That adds another $22.5 billion. And then if you go to the induced impact, meaning what is what are the additional economic impacts of all of the activity around it, and you're up to around $156 billion a year. And all of those, most of that spending is and economic impact is in the club's local communities. So, we're talking about being able to define, again, from an advocacy standpoint, being able to, provide better insights to clubs about, the market and what's happening. That's not an insignificant discovery, if you will, or factoid to know going forward. So next step, what does it mean in terms of payroll? So there's in the study, it was determined that there's about 573,000 employees nationwide that are employed by private clubs. And that equals to about $17.4 billion in wages that are paid every year. So it's a significant bucket of employees and payroll that private clubs are supporting. And where that, from my perspective in the National Club Association, obviously one of our big pillars is advocacy, and being able to tell the story of private clubs is so important to members of Congress and Senate and the administration and agencies understanding the impact of legislation and regulation on the private club industry as a sector. And we've not been able to do that before. And now going forward, we will be able to do that because of the study. So it's really important work, and we're just so pleased to be able to partner with CMAA and club benchmarking on this. I think it has huge implications for us going forward.
Yeah, I think it's cool that because when a lot of people, maybe potentially, when they think of private clubs, they almost, there's a lot of exclusivity, a lot of like luxury kind of attached, which, there is and can be, and depending on the club and the who, what, where, when, whys. But
Right.
I like how this study kind of reframes clubs as a economic engine,
Right.
which is really, really cool. What do you think was like some of the most surprising stats or takeaways that
Well, I think
that, that you
I
got?
don't know that there was a whole lot that was really surprising, but I think it
Yeah.
was nice to be able to quantify it in a way that's really scientific and unassailable. I think previously there'd been a lot of, well, we think there's about 4,000 clubs. That's great and fairly accurate, but it's not empirical. It's not something that we can point to and say, hey, we've done the work on this and we've identified 3,887 clubs with more than $1 million in revenue. It's just a much more authoritative and definitive way of explaining what the market is. So, I think another aspect of that we found and we're able to, again, sort of confirm notions about private clubs was it was seen that 77% of those 3,887 clubs are member-owned nonprofit clubs. That's important. That's important to understand because being able to understand what the largest segments of markets, what unique issues they have, all of those things go into how you present to a member of Congress or an agency on the impact of legislation or regulations. So 77% are member-owned nonprofits. You have 13% that are member-owned for-profit, and then you have 10% that are private taxable third party owned. So they might be owned by an individual or a collection of individuals.
Yeah.
So again, being able to quantify where where folks sit in that specter of their tax status and those types of things is important too. Particularly as we go into next year, and we will be having in Congress a very robust discussion about tax policy. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed in the first Trump administration in 2017 is up for renewal or expiration. And so there's a lot of discussion about extending corporate tax rates or individual tax rates. There's also been some discussion about looking at nonprofits and the proliferation or the perceived proliferation of nonprofits, and whether or not that's appropriate if they're acting like nonprofits or if they're just shielded by nonprofit law and actually generating, acting more like a for-profit entity. So again, being able to define the private club market, which has long had a nonprofit designation to it, again, helps us tell our story to members of Congress and why, if there is a proliferation of nonprofits, it's not the private club side that is part of the problem. So all of this stuff has real world implications in the future for how we present our case to the members to Congress and the agencies.
Now, are some of those policies, are there any other things that you're on the lookout for, or trends that kind of things we should be looking out for, learning more about, or keeping our eye on?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's exciting about about this study is that this really just sets the baseline, and it allows for us to look at different things in a different way, or a series of things in a different way, with much more empirical data that we can, move around. One particular aspect that I'm interested in, and we're trying to see if we can do a little bit more deep dive study on it, is the impact of private clubs on the real estate market. Because, I think most people intuitively understand that if you have a home or a residence that's near a private club, they tend to be higher in value than if there wasn't a club there. Now, you can get into a little bit of a chicken or egg kind of argument. Would they build the nice houses if the club wasn't there, or
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. But there is a correlation between property value and location or proximity to a private club or a golf course, that type of thing. So, being able to take this data and through geolocation and dive into the real estate markets, I think it gives us an opportunity to look at what that means relative to tax policy at the state level and the local level, because states and localities determine property taxes, and clubs often are criticized for not paying as much in property taxes, or a certain value as if that was real estate. And so what this potentially allows us to do is say, yeah, okay, there is a particular treatment of clubs and how they're taxed in the property, but if you tax them out of existence, essentially what you're doing is you're driving the value of the other properties around that club down, and that has a follow-on effect to your revenues. So be careful about how you want to go after clubs, or just how you tax clubs on the property taxes. So there's things like that I think are really important for us to be able to take this baseline study and iterate off of it, and that'll have I think upside potential for us in the future.
How long did the whole thing take? How long was the whole study?
It was 6 or 8 months total of work, and like I said, we did this in conjunction with CMAA and club benchmarking. We went through Iowa State University and their academic department, sort of looking at private clubs, and it was a great team, and I think we arrived at some good data, and it was all generated from things that we had already known about clubs, specific clubs. And then also sort of combing through IRS data through Form 990s and that kind of thing. So it's really, again, the most comprehensive and I think the most empirically sound economic impact study that's been done on the private club world, not just the golf world.
Yeah.
So
Are there any like untapped opportunities for growth now, like kind of seeing and having data like this? Like, I don't know, is it like new regions, expanding the club types? Like what's on like the next frontier?
yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I think it's largely to be seen what sort of economic activity could be generated, or market analysis could be gleaned from this report. But that'll happen with time, and we'll be on the lookout for it.
Yeah. Yes. What else you got cooking?
Well,
or,
obviously,
or anything else you want to talk about with the
sure.
impact report, or how people can find it, edit?
Yeah. So I believe it is up on our website, and or CMAA's website. And we have, I believe, notice has been sent out to all of CMAA's members and our members on it. We've done a couple of little briefings on it to some live audiences. But I think it's just level setting and having a better understanding of what the market is and isn't helps us going forward. So from my perspective, it's really exciting and allows us to iterate, like I was talking about earlier, with potentially looking at real estate impacts. And of course, those are very localized and specific to local markets. But I think there's some generalities that we can pull from the experience of, if we look at a few different markets, I think we can make some assumptions based on that work. So again, we're trying to figure out how we can get that done, and I think it has good implications for us in the future, us being the private club industry or private club community. But beyond that, clearly, since the last time we spoke, we've had an election, and I sent a note to my board the day before the election, and I'd been holding off making any predictions, about the presidential race, or I think it was pretty clear the Republicans were going to take over the Senate. I think it was less clear about the House and certainly the presidential race. But I'd held off on that. Usually, in the past, I've had a fairly good read, I think, on what would happen, but this year was just so weird. So many different things happening, and new candidate with 107 days left to go in the campaign, 2 assassination attempts. This economy that's, some people feel it's okay, and people just feel crunched because of inflation and the ongoing effects of that. It was just a really difficult election to read. But anyway, so I sent a note to my board day before the election, just a quick update. This is what's going on with the association. And if you press me on a prediction, here's my prediction. And I said that my view was that Trump would get somewhere between 286 to 302 electoral votes. But there was a potential that I saw of him overperforming and reaching as high as 312 electoral votes. He overperformed and got 312 electoral votes. The Senate was almost a foregone conclusion that the Republicans would take over. so that was fine. But the other thing was the House, and there was a lot of, it's a tough thing to try to crack because there's 435 individual races and personalities and that kind of thing. But I said that if Trump did overperform and got to 312 electoral votes, that he would have strong enough coattails to be able to keep the House in control of Republicans, and that's appears to be what happened. So a little late in making the prediction, but it was a prediction nonetheless. And so I think we were, not surprised by the result, but sort of expected it. And from an association standpoint, I think we're well positioned to represent private clubs in the new administration and the Republican majority in the Senate and the House. And that's been over the years of working with members of Congress on both sides. We were going to be fine regardless of Democratic control or that kind of thing of the House or Senate. But yeah, it's I think we're well positioned. There's some issue sets, like I mentioned, the tax bill that we know is going to be a factor, and something that we'll be working with members of the House and Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee to push for some tax-related legislation that we've been pushing for years. One of which is the FIT Act, the Personal Health Investment Today Act, that would allow individuals with a health savings account to use up to $2,000 a year towards fitness-related activity. And I think we're well positioned to move that forward, potentially even this year, although I think the chances of that are dwindling. So there's that, the FIT Act, the SIN list, which is a list that is used to determine eligibility for disaster assistance and federal aid in those instances. That includes golf courses along with strip clubs, liquor stores, and that kind of stuff. Not sure why golf had to be lumped into that list, but it is what it is, and we're trying to change it. And so we'll likely see some movement. Whether we get to passage, I don't know, but we definitely will be seeing some movement on that, and NCA will be, pushing it as best we can. So that's the tax side, where I think we're going to see the largest swing in the current administration to the next administration is really in the Department of Labor, and that's true regardless if it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump. It tends to, it's like a pendulum that swings back and forth. When you have a Democratic administration, the Department of Labor is very active and kind of follows the union wish list. And then if a Republican administration comes in, the pendulum swings to the right, and you have more business influence in the Department of Labor. Regulations tend to be slower coming, if they come at all. And more manageable from a business standpoint. It's a hell of a way to run a business when you've got to take into account the labor policy and HR policy based upon who's in the White House. But that's the system we've got. And I when I was doing labor policy full time, it was something that I just would ruminate over, and it just would be nice to get some stability and prevent that pendulum from swinging back and forth just based upon the election.
Yeah. Wasn't there nice? Is there something? It's one of those, like, I am so not up to my knowledge on it, but isn't like overtime tax? Isn't that a big thing now?
Yeah. So the overtime threshold, overtime threshold, that's been a sort of saga for the last,
I think we've even done like episodes on it, and it was something was coming, then all of a sudden now it's I have no idea what's going on, so I figured I'd ask you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And yes, so there has been some movement on the overtime threshold. So the Trump administration back in 2017, 18 revised the threshold up to $35,588. So that, just for folks who aren't familiar, the overtime threshold it's the minimum salary that an employee needs to make in order to be considered exempt for overtime. So you have that sort of floor for the threshold, but then on top of that, you have what's called the duties test. So, are they operating independently? Do they manage other employees? There's other things that go along with determining whether or not they're exempt from overtime. But what the Obama administration tried to do in 2015 was take that threshold up to a number, I believe it was close to $50,000. And the Eastern District of Texas, a U.S. district court, vacated that rule because essentially they said the Obama administration, by setting that threshold so high, essentially made obsolete the duties test, which is part of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And they can't do that because it's an end run on what has been adopted by Congress and their intention. So that was one of the arguments that we made. And the Biden administration, when they tried to do the overtime threshold, they increased it up to almost $60,000. And apologies. So the by raising it up to $60,000, that minimum threshold, again, it created that situation where they're completely making obsolete the duties test that's in the Fair Labor Standards Act. And that was one of the things that we pointed out to the Department of Labor when we filed our comments, is that, look, you already have case law on this and you're going right up against it. You're in jeopardy of this being vacated by the courts. I think we were actually cited in the agency's response to that question in the comment period, and they just kind of patted us on the head and said, thank you, and appreciate it, but we're going to go ahead. So anyway, last Friday, the same court in Texas, East Texas, vacated the rule nationally. So the rule that was going to go into effect, part of it had already gone into effect in July, but the biggest tranche of increase in that threshold was going to happen January 1, again, back up to $60,000. That's off the table. So now the income threshold is back down to $35,588, which is what it was prior to all of this nonsense happening. So from my perspective, from a policy standpoint, I certainly view that as an important victory and something that was of serious concern to me from a club operations standpoint and the impact on budgets, because you could see from the data that we collected with the economic impact study, $32.6 billion in revenue and $17.4 billion in wages. Anywhere from 40 to 55% of the club's budget is on payroll. So anything that you do to escalate that is really impactful on the operations and financial viability of private clubs. So, from my perspective, it was an important victory, and there's other rules.
This is a dumb question. Is it also a victory for the employees? Like, is that like so?
Yeah,
because I've never been in that position. But from like a club, from if I'm a club professional, like, is that good? Is that bad?
So here's how I tried to explain it to the agency, and I actually was on a Zoom call with the deputy secretary before they put out their proposed rule. And the example I gave them was that, look, let's say you have a club pro, golf pro. They have a salary of $40,000, just a straight salary. But where they really make their money is providing lessons and instruction, that kind of thing. And it's not uncommon for club pros to have 40, 50, 60, 70, $80,000 in instruction commissions over the course of a year. Well, what allows them to do that is, they don't have to worry about their hours. They can schedule as much instruction as they want to handle or can handle. And, it's a very seasonal thing. So you work a lot, during the warm months, and then on the cooler months, you're not. it's much more of a 9 to 5 type environment to the extent that's
Yeah.
relevant in this industry. But so, where it has the impact is all of a sudden, if you take that minimum threshold up to $60,000, now that $40,000 employee that may actually be earning over $100,000 because of commissions is subject to overtime. Well, what does that mean? That means that the club now will restrict the number of hours that employee can work because they don't want to pay overtime, right? So what does that do? That lowers the number of hours that club pro is available to do instruction, which then impacts their pocketbook because they can't get those commissions. There's also aspects of it for junior management employees, where if you want to do continuing education and those types of things, it gets real dicey if you have say a conference or something that takes place over a course of a couple of days. How do you manage that time in order to not go into overtime? So then it makes it more difficult for junior employees to get that continuing education or education generally than it otherwise would be. So those are some of the things that we raised to the agencies, and they in all of their wisdom didn't listen to us. So by virtue of the court vacating this rule, it took some pressure off of that for our guys.
Okay.
Which is important.
Yeah. What else you got cooking?
Well, we're, in addition to the election, we're gearing up for new majorities in the House and the Senate next year. We're looking at doing some things a little bit differently in terms of how we do government relations and trying to get more member engagement with that. So kind of cooking up some ideas and schemes and how we can get that get that off the ground. And outside of the government relations side, we're obviously continuing with the planning of our conference up in New York at the New York Athletic Club next April 27th through the 29th. Going to be a fantastic event. I'm really looking forward to it. Looking forward to, getting back into private clubs and holding our conference there. So we'll be at the New York Athletic Club primarily. We'll also have our big Excellence in Club Management event at the University Club in New York, which is an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous facility. And so, yeah, we're 100% go on all of that, and things are shaping up nicely.
Cooking with gas. Actually,
Indeed.
no. If we're doing good cooking, it's over a natural flame, charcoal, right? Maybe it's not gas. Maybe we're cooking with charcoal.
Yep. Whatever imparts the most flavor, we'll go with that. So yeah, it's that's exciting, and I think we'll have some really good speakers, some good panels. We're going to talk about H2Bs a little bit, and succession, transitions in leadership, things like that I think are going to be really beneficial for folks in attendance.
Nice. What's good, sorry.
No, that's fine. Did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say, like, go into more detail if you wanted to on just like the different topics and stuff that we're going to be at the conference, but it's probably still a little bit too early to.
Yeah, we're still firming some things up.
Yeah.
I think we have we have topics that we're exploring. Things like I already mentioned. Kind of the successful transitions in leadership, board development. We're going to hopefully be able to take a look at what's happening in the insurance market for clubs from some executives in that space. And just trying to make things as relevant and kind of deep dives into what clubs are wrestling with. And we might be looking at some workforce issues, and specific to recruiting, the talent and those types of things. So, we're excited about it.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Part 2.
Indeed.
Of the recipe coming soon. Now,
Well, I'll
No,
have
thanks
more to
for
share at our next interlude.
yeah interlude. But no, thanks for all you all do at the NCA. It's been what, 60 or 80 years you've been helping the industry
So 1961, yeah. So
truck
63
along.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
couple, just a few, just a
Just a
few,
little bit. Yep.
just a little
And
bit.
so it's yeah, I've said this to a couple of people, but strangely enough, 1961 features prominently in my life. I have obviously the National Club Association, which was founded in 1961. Um, the club that I belong to and was president of was founded in 1961. And my beloved Minnesota Vikings were formed in 1961. So I'm not sure why or how that happened, but it is an important year in my life, even though I
Interesting.
wasn't born.
And then
So
the next Green Day album will be named 1961. And
who
that's just
knows?
when all hell breaks loose.
Right.
That's
That's that's the point at which we reach singularity.
that's when like something's like the stars are aligned. I don't know, the chakras, whatever people have.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that that I talked about last week, because it was fresh, was obviously the H-2B situation, and
Yeah.
those are, that source of employees is important for clubs, particularly up and down the Eastern Seaboard. But we're hopeful that the Biden administration just released an additional 64,000 visas, so that's helpful. We're trying to stay on top of the Department of Labor to make sure that those are processed in a way that's timely, which didn't occur in previous years, but we're hopeful that they've corrected some things. But we've talked for years about potentially changing that program and really making it a more robust program. But unfortunately, I think we're entering into a majority in an administration where I think that's going to be much more difficult. And any issue, I sort of view the H-2B program as kind of tangential to immigration, but it gets lumped into the immigration issue writ large. And as you can imagine, with the election and the results, immigration issues are really almost singularly focused on the border, and the illegal immigration population, and how do we handle that? So it's going to be, I think, a little bit more difficult to get our point across on H-2Bs, but I'm hopeful that we can get to a good place on that issue over time. But it's going to be, I'm afraid it's going to be a rough go for a while. One of the things I talked about with the attendees at the conference was, the thing that there are a couple of things that sort of keep me up at night, looking ahead. One is just the overall economic situation, and how that plays out. I'm concerned that we could get into a sort of frothy bubble kind of market, which could have some follow-on effects if that does happen and it does burst. So that's a concern. I don't think that's unique to anybody, but the other big concern that I have is just where the immigration policy and how that's implemented in the next year or two plays out. Particularly, as it relates to forced, deportations and those types of things. I think there seems to be a lot of public support for that right now, in the 60 to 70% range. I think once you start getting into that situation where people are seeing people forcibly deported, and the sort of impact that has on families and that kind of thing, I think you could potentially see the public sentiment shift on that, and it could shift markedly and unpleasantly, and that's a concern to me.
Mm.
And just what it means for how we interact with each other. Um, it's fraught with difficulty. So
Yeah. Does the J1 stuff have any, is that totally different?
it's a different program.
Yeah.
It's set up a little bit differently than H2Bs, but we have seen clubs that have started to use J1s more. And but again, it's a program that I would sort of put tangentially to immigration policy, but it's sort of lumped into it. And the incoming president, has his very strong views on immigration policy that I think is really more focused on the border security issues and illegal immigration than it is on these individual programs. But the overall climate has an impact on the willingness to address some of these issues. It just becomes really difficult in Congress.
Yeah.
So, not to end on a unhappy note or a somber note, but all is well. We've gone through difficult periods in the past, and with regard to policy, whether it's immigration or anything else. We have a resilient country, and we also have a resilient industry. And what we've seen over the course of the last 5 years, I think, has demonstrated that. And there's always reason to be optimistic.
Limitations force creativity.
Indeed.
Well, thank you for coming on, sir. Always appreciate it, and always a pleasure when our paths cross.
Indeed. Great to see you. And I know we say this every time, but hopefully it won't be as long next time. I did have some issues pop up personally that kept us from doing this, but we'll not let as much time lapse from our next conversation.
Yes, sir. Hope you all enjoyed that episode. Hope you all got something from it. Real quick, if you would like early access and early copy to the Club Entertainment Guide, send me an email with the subject line Entertainment Guide to hello@privateclubradio.com. hello@privateclubradio.com. If you're enjoying the content, share it with somebody. Share it with someone who you think might enjoy this episode or any of the other episodes. Give it a 5-star rating with a comment. That means the world. But that's this episode. I'm your host, Denny Corby. Until next time, catch y'all on the flippity flip.